Almighty God, in whose name we gather and whose love we acknowledge, be with us this afternoon as we listen to your voice in the sounds and signs of friendship and wisdom. Make us ever attentive to your presence, especially in your poor and in your prophets, you who live forever and ever. Amen. Please be seated. As Chancellor of St. John's University, in the name of the sponsoring Benedictine community, St. John's Abbey, and in the name of the Board of Regents, I herewith call into session this commencement convocation at the conclusion of our 131st year for the conferring of the academic degrees granted by the university. I request Father Hilary Timish, President of the University, to take charge of these exercises.
It's a pleasure to greet you, the graduating class, and your parents, family members, and friends. Sorry, the center of the campus is topsy-turvy this year. We put up some obstacle courses out here. It's a kind of final test for graduation. I congratulate you on getting here anyway, and on completing your years at St. John's. I hope they've been good years for you in every way, that you've grown intellectually and socially and spiritually, that you've formed lasting friendships, and that you will go on into your adult careers proud to say that you have a degree from St. John's. Without giving an impromptu commencement speech, I want to tell you that increasingly I recognize a certain profile among St. John's graduates in public or private life. There are some exceptions, I suppose, but on the whole, I find St. John's graduates competent, self-assured, responsible, trustworthy, congenial, good-looking. Maybe I'm a bit biased, but other people who are not St. John's graduates tend to confirm my very positive impression of Johnnies. No doubt most of this is due to your parents and your earlier schooling. But I would like to think that in an age of hype and image making, St. John's graduates real people, people of moral and intellectual integrity. If this is the case, it's largely due to your teachers. They model our educational ideals, and at this time I want to thank them and the administrative staff and the support staff for their work this year. They deserve a good vacation. Applaud. There are two people here to address you today, but before I introduce them, I want to say a word of recognition about two others who will not address you, but whom you know and who are leaving positions that affected you and many students before you at St. John's. The first is Robert Spaeth, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences for the past 9 years. His influence on the intellectual life of St. John's has been particularly distinguished, and it will continue in his role as a faculty member. In addition, he has kept his good sense, his fairness, and his humor in an office tailor-made to attract problems, large and small. Despite the fact that students who see the dean are generally in trouble if they do it before commencement, I ask you to join me in applauding him. Bob, would you stand? I also wish to cite Father Finian MacDonald, who will leave the university this fall to take up a new role at St. Anselm's Priory in Tokyo, a branch of St. John's Abbey. Father Finian has devoted 26 glorious years to St. John's students. As Dean of Students, as Director of the Counseling Service, as Director of Academic Advising, to mention only his main titles over the last quarter century. In addition to that, he was always a resident in the dorms and an impresario of unscheduled events. His personal influence has been quiet but incalculable. Time does not allow me to list his virtues. Suffice it to say that he, perhaps more than anyone else in the administration, has known how to make the necessary regulations of college and academic life intelligible and manageable, and has known when to disregard them for a greater good. While he is beguiling the unsuspecting citizens of Tokyo with his all-purpose basic Japanese, we will be struggling to carry on without this wise, warm, and excessively modest monk. I think he is here somewhere. Finian, if you are not blushing too obviously, would you stand so that all of us can applaud you? Now I turn to the speaker for the senior class, Michael Cronin. Mike comes from Rochester, Minnesota, where he attended Lourdes High School. His parents are Donald and Anne Marie Bach. He has majored in government at St. John's and will go to Washington next month to join a congressional staff. In addition to achieving an excellent academic record, he has been a resident assistant, a Eucharistic minister, an assistant in academic advising, coordinator of summer registration in 1987, and a 3-year member of the track and field team. He has been a SEAL scholar for 3 years. He has a host of friends, and you will be hearing from him not only now, but in your afterlife as alumni, because he has signed on with George Ramler as co-class agent for the class of '88. Mike Cronin.
I have never seen a graduate fall from the skies. Four weeks ago, after I learned that I would be speaking this commencement Sunday, I immediately asked a few people what would be expected of me. The first person I asked said simply, brevity. The second person said, have something to say. When I asked a close friend, he said, it doesn't matter, it won't be remembered. Given these requirements, I am here before you today. Here we are in Lake Woebegone country. We are dressed in our accomplishment. Our teachers, families, friends, our most avid supporters are here to celebrate the joy of commencement, the joy of a new beginning. What St. John's has meant to each one of us cannot be summed up in simple terms, nor even in a short speech. For St. John's has meant something different to each one of us. Still, St. John's leaves us with the same message, that we leave here with minds and hearts more developed, capable of bringing mature judgment to complex issues, and capable of acting responsibly in the world in which we will soon emerge as college graduates. For many of us, St. John's has been a place of scholarly achievement, a place where great ideas and issues of the day have been explored and investigated. For some, St. John's has been a place of discernment, a place where we have come to understand ourselves better. For others, St. John's has been a place of spiritual growth, a time to begin to understand one's relationship with God. And there are many for whom St. John's has been an expensive resort, a place to relax, breathe in the fresh air, and not worry, and if time permits, get an education. For all of us, I hope, St. John's has been a place of community, a place where each and every individual comes together to make the complete whole. If St. John's hasn't been any of this to us, then we haven't been paying attention. Our experience here has mattered, probably more than we will ever admit. We are the product of a liberal arts education, an education that has broadened and enhanced our vision of self, others, and the world around us. I always thought a liberal arts education was a good education until I received my first rejection letter. Dear Mr. Cronin, your qualifications were interesting, but they did not fit the specific needs of the position. Best wishes to you in your job search. Well, my name was spelled wrong, and I don't want to sell insurance anyway. Our experience here has meant more than getting a job or entrance into graduate school. The academic design that we have all experienced has begun to broaden our scope of the world. Our course of studies has deepened our desire for knowledge. According to a corporate president, a liberally educated person is the person needed at the highest levels of corporate life. It is that peculiar mix of the behavioral sciences, natural sciences, history, mathematics, and English that produces a mind capable, in later life, of bringing mature judgment to complex and sometimes great issues. This is why we have spent so much time here. We have begun to become learned people, realizing all the while how much more there is to know. It has been said that St. John's, a place secluded in central Minnesota, is a place of security. No worries, no adversity, no sense of the real world, a notion that I detest. People have been telling me all along, wait until you reach the real world. Hearing this, I began to wonder if my experience here was somehow unreal. Yet St. John's, too, can be a world of challenge, where our greatest sensibilities are put to task. Our experience here has probably told us more about ourselves than we previously knew. Hopefully, our understanding of community has allowed us to approve of people whose values and beliefs are different from our own. Our minds have been challenged by difficult examinations, papers, and research projects. Our hearts have experienced a painful relationship or two. We have felt the deaths of people who helped form the character of St. John's. We have lost Fathers Otto Weber, Ivan Havener, and Michael Blecker. We have enjoyed the happy moments as we have endured the sad. We have accepted the growth process, which begins to make us who we really are and allows us to be less of what others want us to be. We have all studied a certain discipline. We have written and talked about the great issues of the day. But what's on our minds today? The future of the third world, the issue of abortion, homelessness in our country? Doubtful. Car payments, rent payments, health insurance, and student loans? Likely. After we leave here today, each of us will begin a new journey. Some of us will continue in education by studying law, medicine, and philosophy. Many will begin active military service, while some will start a family. Some members of our class will volunteer time and talent for people in need. A few will be unemployed. Whatever we do when we leave this place, we must not forget our experience here. We must not forget that our experience has mattered. I recall another journey. It was on a crisp fall day 4 years ago when I first came to St. John's. I was with my mother. As we approached the exit off 94, I said, "Mom, let's go home. I don't want to go here anymore." She responded in a mother's wisdom, "Oh, honey, you'll do just fine." The tone in her voice led me to believe that she was anxious to get rid of me. Now it is time, and I don't want to leave. I like this place. I feel comfortable here. I have come to love the woods and the sag, and most of all, the people. I have begun to endure the tests and the papers. But the people in charge tell us that our time is up. We have done all there is to do. In a few hours, we will leave this place and find ourselves in the midst of a less secluded world, no longer in close reach of our friends. Just as our education has been a foundation for further growth, so have our friendships. Today, we honor these friendships. Today, we recognize this education. We celebrate the challenge and the hope in adversity. Today, we celebrate a new beginning. Thank you.
Paul David Schurke is an honors graduate of the class of '77. He came to St. John's from Minneapolis, took an individualized major in the natural sciences and humanities, supplemented with journalism courses at St. Cloud State, followed up with graduate studies in journalism at Minnesota. All of this prepared him to found Wilderness Inquiry II, a nonprofit foundation-sponsored program that provides wilderness adventure opportunities for persons with sensory or mobility impairments. He is married to Susan Hendrickson Schurke. They have one child, Bria. They live at Ely in the Boundary Waters canoe area. Paul was co-leader and navigator of the Steger International Polar Expedition in 1986 and got back from the North Pole in time to receive a presidential citation at Commencement 2 years ago. Since then, he has co-authored North to the Pole, an absorbing account of the expedition. We invited him to speak today not because he is an intrepid explorer and a good writer, but because he has reflected on where we are as a nation in 1988 and has something to tell us. The title of his address is, "Where Do We Grow From Here?" Paul?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, and congratulations to all of you graduates. I am deeply honored to have been invited to speak to you today. Since our team reached the North Pole by dog sled 2 years ago, we've received many awards and accolades for our contribution to exploration history, but your invitation represents to me by far the greatest of these honors, and you, the class of '88, have my heartfelt gratitude for this. So in other words, thanks guys, this is great. When I think back to my graduation week, I remember entertaining thoughts regarding just how was I ever going to retain all the knowledge I had gained during my years at St. John's. I wondered, for example, how would I ever remember the elements on the periodic chart or the trigonometric functions? How would I ever keep track of the key philosophers of the Renaissance? Or worse yet, the names of the bones in my feet? Well, 11 years later, I'm here to tell you that that has never proven to be a problem. Because, frankly, I've forgotten the whole works. But that doesn't matter, because what does linger on, what you retain, is far more important. It holds far greater leverage over your future and your livelihood than all the facts in our fine library here. Because what sticks concerns not so much what to think, that dry compendium of facts that's quickly lost, but rather how to think, the thought processes by which we survey and assess our world. It's a matter of values, and I believe that St. John's is extraordinary in this regard. Graduates leave here not only with a solid education, but with an enhanced sense of values as well. I'd like to speak today on how we must incorporate two of those values, service and stewardship, into our careers. The dedication to serve one's fellow man permeates the monastic community here, and to some degree the campus. The Benedictine influence imbues us with a call to service through a lasting sense of responsibility for the welfare of the human family. Service of this kind not only enhances the vitality of the communities we live in, but it's important on a global scale as well. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in his role as architect of the United Nations, said some 40 years ago, "Today we are faced with a preeminent fact that if civilization is to survive, we must cultivate the science of human relationships, the ability of all people to live and work together in the same world at peace." Another value reflected here at St. John's concerns our integration with the natural world. Our university's woodland setting, a setting in which each of us could find that small, quiet place inside us where reverence dwells, instills us with a sense of stewardship towards that natural world, that complicated, interdependent, interrelated tangle of life on Earth. It begins with the atmosphere, which Lewis Thomas has called the world's largest membrane, and ends with this tiniest particle necessary to life, perhaps as yet undiscovered. Thanks to the space flights of the past decade, we have caught a glimpse of our planet from outer space. We have seen a single living, breathing organism, blue-green and alive, floating in its membrane of atmosphere like an enormous cell. The health of this natural world depends largely on our stewardship of its environment and its resources. Now, you'll find in the years ahead that these values, service and stewardship, values that have been bolstered by your years at St. John's, are extremely important. Let me explain why. I believe that 1988, the year of your graduation, is a pivotal one in some ways. On a national scale, 1988 is and will continue to be the year in which our country begins to reckon with the fact that the United States is entering an era of relative decline. Nothing drastic. No one is suggesting that we are on a tailspin towards destruction. But relative to the rise of other economic powers, particularly the Pacific Rim countries, it's now quite apparent that our country will not wield the same economic and political clout in the next century as we do in this one. 1988 is also something of a pivotal year on a global scale, as it becomes quite apparent as well that I propose the state of our planet is not particularly good. And sometimes it's easy to lose sight of that fact out here in the paradise behind the pine curtain. Our world is shadowed by wars and prospects of wars, malnutrition, disease, critical fuel shortages, intellectual starvation, and homelessness are the everyday lot of perhaps half of the world's 5 billion people. Political cruelties abound. So does violence in many forms. Environmental degradation continues largely unchecked. And with the near-term prospect of some 10 billion people living on this planet, these maladies are not by any means likely to diminish. Overshadowing these dire problems is the fact that we continue to live in the shadow of the bomb. The U.S. and the Soviet Union somehow managed to add to their existing strategic arsenals enough new nuclear weapons each year to destroy every city on the planet, something we can already do 20 times over. Recent diplomatic accords, in particular the proposed INF Treaty, offer some grounds for hope, but I believe that the arms race remains the preeminent global concern of our time. Now, these are not pleasant topics, and I hesitate to bring them up today because today is, of course, a day of celebration. But these problems, economic decline on the home front, inhumanity and injustice on a global scale, environmental degradation, and the overriding threat of nuclear war, are ones you graduates will have to reckon with throughout your careers. And I believe that the values of service and stewardship enhanced here at St. John's equip you with the tools necessary to make significant contributions towards solutions of these problems. because the solutions lie in a realignment of societal values. We must accept the fact that economic growth can no longer be the holy grail that beckons us on and on and on. A mature society must supplant its focus on growth in the GNP with a growth in our understanding of the interrelations of the human family and of our integration with the natural world. Now, it's a tall order, because in some ways this is asking for a wholesale change in perspective. For the past 6 centuries, the goal of civilization has remained unquestioned: material growth without end and territorial expansion in the New World. Growth fueled by an abundance of raw resources, burgeoning populations, exploding technology and industrial development. The pursuit of personal gain dominated most everyone's lives, making it the compelling motivation for existence for many people. And in the process, many social and environmental problems encountered by growth-oriented societies have not been solved. Rather, they've been buried by ways of expansion, by war, by the challenge of the new frontiers, by advancing technology. In the early 70s, when I was entering my college years, some of these problems, particularly those involving resource depletion and environmental degradation, came to a head. The question was raised loud and clear: can we sustain this economic growth? A landmark study entitled "Limits to Growth" indicated that at current rates of consumption, the supply of many critical resources would be all but depleted by the end of this century. And then there was Earth Day, a day of ecology fairs, alternative energy workshops, and environmental festivities, which rallied millions of people to the cause of conservation. Sweeping legislation in the years that followed promised cleaner air and water, encouraged recycling, and spurred the search for new sources of energy. This heightened awareness and concern had a tremendous impact on I and many of my college classmates. Many of us became active in the St. John's chapter of the Minnesota Public Interest Research Group, a statewide program better known as MPIRG, that provided an avenue by which students could take part in enhancing public awareness and lobbying for political action on environmental, consumer, and social justice issues. Then, during our senior years, a fellow Johnny, Greg Lace, and I launched a nonprofit venture that combined our interests in wilderness preservation and social issues. Known as Wilderness Inquiry, the program, as Father Hillary mentioned, sponsors all kinds of treks by dog sled, by canoe, kayak, bicycle, for groups that include people with disabilities. And ultimately, that association with wilderness programs led to my partnership with Will Steger and our dog sled journey to the North Pole. But it's interesting for me to look back over the past decade and see how the emphasis on college campuses has shifted away somewhat from concern over environmental and social issues and back towards business as usual. Environmental studies programs have all but disappeared from most college catalogs. The pursuit of a CPA or an MBA is once again the hot ticket item. And at St. John's, I understand that the MPIRG chapter folded years ago. But these changes are understandable. They merely reflect the coming of the Reagan years, which brought promises of new prosperity, of economic growth that might once again bury all of those problems. And we all started saying, hey, no troubles here. Well, a random scan of last week's newspapers provides numerous examples that suggest otherwise. We learned, for example, that the White House is pressuring Congress to open the last 5% of pristine Arctic tundra remaining in the United States, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, in an effort to secure what has been estimated to represent a mere 200-day supply of oil. And in the Amazon basin, the Yanomamo Indians, the largest primitive society left on Earth, are about to be ousted from their rainforest habitat because the Brazilian government wants to open the region for mineral exploitation. And we read that on the world's oceans, ships laden with hazardous wastes have been roaming the seas for months. One from Philadelphia has been out there for over a year because no suitable place can be found to dump their toxic trash. Well, I submit to you that these episodes and many other like them are acts of desperation. To continue asking the question, can we sustain this state of affairs, is to admit to absolute disregard for the welfare of our planet. A realignment of goals is imperative. Service to humankind and stewardship of our resources and environment are aspirations that must be adopted by all people in the decades to come. This change begins when each of us build a vision of a better world into our lifestyles and careers through those values of service and stewardship. So how do we implement this vision? Well, regarding stewardship of the natural world, our challenge will be to establish a sustainable system, emphasizing more prudent lifestyles that enable us to live within the carrying capacity of our planet's limited environment. We must recognize that life is a property of the planet and not merely of our own frail and fallible bodies. Therefore, we must organize our lives in ways harmonious with all life and live within voluntary restraints. It means examining our lifestyles and workplaces to eliminate wasteful habits. It means lending support to organizations that monitor the planet's environmental health. And it means raising our children with a sense of awe, of respect and reverence for the natural world. Regarding service to the human family, we must seek the achievement of a more peaceful and equitable relation between people and nations. That vision is manifested in the opportunities we take to use talents and experiences that accrue through our careers, not just for personal gain, but for the welfare of humankind. On the local level, that might mean becoming active in community service projects. On the national level, it might take the form of contributing one's skills to political action programs on social justice. And we can also become involved internationally, serving in a capacity that has come to be known as citizen diplomacy. This is an avenue of service that is of particular interest to me and my wife, and I'd like to share a little information with you about it and the impact it might have on the arms race. Many citizens from all walks of life are serving as pathfinders in Soviet-American relations, helping to unlock the deadly embrace in which our two countries now find themselves. Who are these people? Well, they include Cynthia Lazaroff, founder of the USSR Youth Exchange Program and leader of Soviet-American wilderness expeditions for teenagers; John Crystal, an Iowa farmer who pioneered agricultural exchanges with the Soviet Union; Christopher Senate, a young lawyer who organized Bike for Peace, a Soviet-American ride from Moscow to Washington; and Samantha Smith, a schoolgirl from Maine who became a world celebrity when her hand-scrawled letter to Yuri Andropov was published in Pravda and led to her goodwill visit to the Soviet Union. Other citizen diplomats enabled influential Soviets and Americans to set the stage for agreements to ban above-ground nuclear tests, to install the original hotline between Washington and Moscow, to expand trade and allow direct air flights between our two countries. The multiplicity of relationships that people like these have helped establish is a genuine stabilizing force. Consider the example of China. That nuclear-armed country was widely regarded as, quote-unquote, the yellow menace as recently as the late 1960s. But through an intricate web of relationships, largely in business, we came to view that country as a friend rather than an adversary in little more than a decade. Likewise, the power to remake Soviet-American relations into an exemplar of an era for enduring global peace, it lies in our hands. Organizations exist which provide avenues by which people in any profession can utilize their skills as citizen diplomats. Examples include such groups as Educators for Social Responsibility, the Federation of American Scientists, Athletes United for Peace, Lawyers Alliance for Nuclear Arms Control, and the International Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War. And I might add that nearly all of those groups include members in both the Soviet Union and the United States. And yes, there are even ways that someone like me, who makes a career out of adventure programs and wilderness treks, to utilize my skills as a citizen diplomat as well. One of the projects that my wife and I are currently involved with is a proposed expedition across the Bering Strait with a team of Soviets and Americans. The journey would represent the first sanctioned crossing of that geographic link between the U.S. and the Soviet Union since the advent of the Cold War. More importantly, it would represent a diplomatic breakthrough, opening a new avenue of communication between our two countries. And it will help reestablish cultural exchanges among native villagers on either side of the strait who speak the same language, hold the same cultural heritage, and share relatives, yet have been denied any contact since early in this century. So what makes me think that these lofty notions of service and stewardship aren't just so many idealistic schemes and dreams? Well, for one thing, I know that pursuit of goals like these proves to be much more gratifying in the long run than the pursuit of personal gain. Austrian psychiatrist Viktor Frankl points out so eloquently in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, written following his experience as a prisoner in a Nazi concentration camp, that what we are ultimately searching for in this life is not a stress-free state, not economic security, not even freedom from want, but rather what we are all ultimately searching for is a goal worthy of our potential. That alone answers the deepest yearnings of the human psyche. And surely there are few goals that place greater demands on our potential than a better understanding of our natural world and the people we share it with. Secondly, I don't feel that these are idealistic notions because I'm convinced they are achievable. You know, I learned many things through our journey to the North Pole, but chief among these was the knowledge of how much a group of individuals can accomplish when they fix their minds on a goal. A seemingly inexhaustible reservoir of perseverance lies there waiting to be tapped. When focused on a goal, the human spirit, or rather God's spirit within us, is indomitable. You know, countless motivational books talk about this power of positive thinking, but I found that none of them satisfactorily account for the source of the power. About a year ago, I found some help with the answer towards that question in a poem by William Murray, which somehow landed on my desk. And I'd like to close with this poem because it articulates why the process of making a steadfast commitment towards reaching these goals ensures they will be achieved. It reads, "Until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and many splendid plans. The truth is that the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. All sorts of things occur to help one that would otherwise never have occurred. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents and meetings and material assistance which no one could have dreamt would have ever come their way. I hope that each of you will incorporate into your careers that vision of a better world, implementing it through service and stewardship, knowing that, as the poet points out, when you make a steadfast commitment towards these goals, God works with you. Thank you, and again, congratulations.
And now we will pause for music. The senior ensemble, members of the St. John's Men's Chorus, will sing the traditional Gaudiamus Igitur in an arrangement by Dr. Axel Timer.
we get a G in organ?
Gaudiamus igitur, Juven estum sumus. Gaudiamus igitur, Juven estum sumus. Post secundam juventutem, post molestam selectutem, nos abeitumus, nos abeitumus. Ubi sunt qui ante nos, in mundo fruere, ubi sunt qui ante nos, in mundo fruere, Valite ad superos, transite ad inferos, ubiam furere, ubiam furere. Vita nostra brevis est, brevi professores, vita nostra brevis est, brevi filii ectur, veni nos velociter, rapid nos atrociter, ne bine parcetur, ne bine parcetur.
Will the candidates for the degrees of Bachelor of Science and Bachelor of Arts please rise? Father Hillary, I present the candidates for the degrees of Bachelor of Science and Bachelor of Arts who have been approved by the faculty of the university.
By virtue of the authority committed to me, I confer upon you the degrees of Bachelor of Science and Bachelor of Arts, which have been approved by the faculty of the university and for which you have been recommended. The Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences will please have the candidates come forward.
The degree of Bachelor of Science summa cum laude is conferred upon William Pelfrey. The degree of Bachelor of Arts summa cum laude is conferred upon Frederick A. Monette, Brother Kurt Van Kuren, and David Stern. The degree of Bachelor of Science summa cum laude is conferred upon Paul James Benning, Paul John Charpentier, Jerry Brian Paschke, Paul Hattenauer. The degree of Bachelor of Arts summa cum laude is conferred upon Gregory Martin Steininger. The degree of Bachelor of Science magna cum laude is conferred upon John Albert Rebay, John Kevin Goulden, and Gregory John Hamill. The degree of Bachelor of Arts magna cum laude is conferred upon Benedict Richard Haig and Robert John Conzemius. The degree of Bachelor of Science magna cum laude is conferred upon Nicholas William Coster, Daniel Morse, Keith Michael Peterson, Carl John Baltus, Timothy John Stelzer, and John Elliott Murray. The degree of Bachelor of Arts magna cum laude is conferred upon Christopher David Cracker, Patrick William Seng, William Leon Straub, Paul Edward Beckerman, Seth Victor Beckman, Peter Marcus Witt, and Brian Nicholas Schmitz. The degree of Bachelor of Science cum laude is conferred upon John Joseph Bastian, Stephen John Sexton, James R. White, Michael Paul Carlson, Daniel W. Christofferson, Eric Keith Martins, Brian Philip Perry, and Samuel Joseph Schmidt. The degree of Bachelor of Arts cum laude is conferred upon Martin Shields Fallon, William Joseph Schmelzer, Peter Joseph Rothstein, and Daniel Edward Larkin. The degree of Bachelor of Science is conferred upon Wade Winfield Weiss, Paul Thomas Oren, Mark Donald Stenbeck, Kevin Richard Dvorak, Jerome William Kaler, John David Ellis, Donald Jerome Anderson, Michael Paul Morton, Stephen Robert Croyce, Edmund Joseph Kirchner, Peter Simon DeBay, Michael Thomas Rummel, Andrew John Kramer, Daniel James McGee, Daniel Kenrick Heinen, Matthew Fine Funenstein, William Walter Coop III, Theodore John Smith, Timothy Paul Rossini, Stephen Patrick Persian, Gregory Paul Fowey, Patrick Albert Bresnahan, Robert Reeser, James Spila, Christopher John Becker, Timothy Paul Moore, Michael David Fritz, John Henry Billion, Mark Andrew Glad, Christopher Allen Check, Christopher Roy Veach, Richard Gerard Wojciechowski, Timothy Martin Farrell, Michael Roger Junker, Charles Albert Schaefer, Timothy James Hughes, Richard R. Thice, Stephen Francis O'Keefe, Stephen E. Randall, John Matthew Vetter, Christopher Allen Lohman, Patrick James Shannon, Gregory John Masonic, John Douglas Gavaretsky, Greg Lester Miller, John Stephen Douglas Ehlers, Raymond Bruce Banfield, John Nygaard Aronson, Jeffrey Allen Holst, Ryan James Logan, Robert Arthur Manning, John Michael Cunningham, James Edward Patrick Blaney, Charles William Shimoleski, Ian Bruce Meeker, Paul Andrew Miller, Gregory Vincent Samala, Christopher James DeShane, Louis John Branca, Michael R. Thorlson, Thomas Joseph Steinke, Daniel R. Mayer, William Joseph Velker, Edward Allen Stetz, David James Holtz, Michael Wallace Burr, George Christopher Ramler, Mark Thad Mooney, Dennis Richard Wilson, Richard Anthony Truman, John Michael Jorfie, Michael James Cronin, Robert Allen Lane, Tulio Gerardo Suarez, Kent James Guyton, Charles Michael Scott, Sean Richard Cruz, Scott Allen Schultz, Kevin Kenneth Schneider, Walter Phillips Michaels, Anthony Guy Valentini, Anthony John Varanth, John William Meany, John Sutton Newhouse, Joseph Michael Malik, Michael Leo Kutsky, Michael William Shimmick, Larry Joseph Notch, John Michael O'Brien, John Charles Patron, Jeffrey Dale Smeans, Dale Francis Wagoner, Richard M. Schultz, Jeffrey Lee Hansen, Darren Thomas Persley, David Scott Anderley, John Gregory Furnell, Benjamin David Andrews, Thomas C., Bernard Kwok-Tung Chow, Stephen C., Robert Patrick Danzel, Paul Richard Nettleton, Mitchell Jerome Holcher, Brian David Voss, Jeffrey Thomas Flagg, Joseph Thomas Moriarty, Brian John Kubiena, Daniel J. Hoffman, Donald Patrick Jack, Darren Lee Beekler, Joseph Patrick Leahy, John Joseph Takala, John Richard Punzak, John F. Ebis, Kurt Edward Schwieders, Kevin Peter Weiss, William Gerard Lane, David Nyson Dristy, Douglas Ronald Johnson, David John Ellingson, Daniel Frederick Scheller, Thomas William Hoffman, Douglas Allen Larson, Tate Justin Nagengast, Paul John DeMorit, Matthew Peter Lawrence, John Patrick Nathy, William Lothar Fowler, Anthony Alvin Gerlach, Timothy Robin Ashwell, Reggie John Licari, Richard Mark Jennison, John Adam Krasowski, Stephen Eugene Carlisle, James Richard Wasenius, John Michael Strom, Jerome Patrick Merkel Jr., John Thomas Ennisvet, Christopher John Anderson, Thomas J. McGoldrick, Paul William Benton, Craig Dennis Tadich, Bradley David McDowell, Kevin Patrick Cummings, Thomas Gerard Sweetman, Todd Michael Decker, Ka Chung Wong, Hak Tin Soy, Timothy David Reese, Paul John Borgerding, Chad Joseph Gazelle, Steve Kenneth Kragulski, Thomas John Anderson, Dean Rudolph Danninger, Peter E. Hacker, Patrick John Genrich, William Charles Kaufman, Jeffrey David Wearer, Temnuo M. Musa, Danny Ronald Cohorst, David Anthony Berger, Thomas Christopher Kowalkuski, Christopher John Posinger, John Thomas Frederick Murphy, Duran Sidney Cunningham, David Andrew Smoot, John Conrad Kolb, Mark Allen Town, John Bernard Drew, Michael Stephen Funk, Christopher John Thone, Kittrick Eugene Wolfe, Robert Michael Dingman, Michael Thomas Crowley III, Robert James Kapla, Troy A. Loeb, Sean Michael Govern, Gerald Scott Coles, William Peter Hartson, Troy John Fritz, Jonathan Richard Hansen, Corey Ray Bonema, John Matthew DeVos, Joseph Allen Andries, Alexander Constantine Daskalos, Kevin Barry Hines, Corey Scott Plain, David Ronald Sweeley, David Christopher Wright, David Scott Eberly, David Charles Woodbeck, David John Charpentier, David Cole Mariani, Thomas Allen Zippoy, Gregory John Creer, Paul Dean Martin, Bevan Michael Petricka, Gerald Thomas McLaughlin, Gregory John Broderson, Michael L. Arthur Jindra, David James Ryan, Daniel Theodore Linders, Todd Matthew Setter, Anthony Joseph Collette, Richard David O'Day, Michael James Breen, David Michael Lunzer, Mark D. Anderson, Lee Edward Gabler, John Howard Gans, Thomas Stunky Lazuski Jr., John Victor Stokes, Stephen George Schmidt, Joseph Gerard Will, Patrick Edward Lynch, Patrick Norman Donovan, Matthew Scott Simonette, Michael Richard Heffernan, Nathan Patrick Fryer, Thomas James Yacht, Brian Howard Allen, William Bruce Manning, William Peter Elmquist, John Joseph Lichtig, William Patrick Davern, Richard Albert McCarthy, John Patrick Curry, Michael Edward McGraw, Richard Sean Crislip, Pepin Ramon Argamasilla, David Anthony Schmuck, James Dale Check, Michael Joseph Riley, Thomas Klaus Bray, Demaine Delano Sandy, James Peter Kitchmarrick III, Joseph Louis Eltgroth, Stephen Michael Loscheider, Thomas John Illig, Joel Francis Walton, Patrick Lewis Brecken, J. Allen Newman, Christopher Michael Holloway, Todd Andrew Bach, Richard Dennis Lavercombe, James Kevin Redmond, Paul Joseph Lucas, John P. Jessen, Gregory Allen Page, Christopher George Philip Walker, Christopher Allen Stoneberg, Matthew John Thurno, Christopher Allen Chalmers, Timothy Shaw Murphy, William Joseph Wolfe, Scott Philip Nugent, Donald Roger Krause, Paul Lawrence Davenport, Timothy Allen Carroll, Andrew James Miller, John Charles McCarthy, Daniel John Hoban, Kevin Lee Smith, Peter Joseph Stoddart, Patrick John Ryan, Timothy Raymond Chisholm, Michael Damian Etzel, Michael Carl Peterson, Thomas John Pearson, Paul Michael Dyson, Thomas Hunt Spaulding, John William Jernberg, Daniel Gerard Ratka, Philip John Michael Krantz, Anthony Charles Siglitano, Thomas William Chambers, Robert Charles Kirofer, Joseph Gerard Schuler, Mark Howard Young, Peter Robert Doherty, George Edward Maurer, David Joseph Hipsch, Brian David Stotko, David John Medvec, Michael George Gottfried, Leonard Andrew Brennan III, Paul Roberts Johnston, Robert William Fairbank, Robert Matthew Christensen, Charles Nelson Sellers, Gregory James Fitzpatrick, Chris Alden Stewart, Michael Stephen Squira, Sean Patrick Harlan, Philip Harold, Jason Anthony Koffel, Maximilian Tarkington Shemish, Patrick Gerard Balder, Matthew William Shane, Andrew Ernest Stewart, Michael H. Donahue, Jr., Gregory Robert Steiger, Robert Joseph Conlon, Paul Anthony Bennett, Michael Joseph McGarry, Paul James Souchere, Patrick Gerard Redding, Todd Joseph Guerrero, Christopher Elvis Barda, John Anthony Burke, Thomas Allen Duno, Michael Raymond Vicelio, Thomas Edward Mead, Michael David Getke, Andrew Thomas Koski, Patrick Anthony Corrigan, John Timothy Smithwick, Daniel Colin McEntee, Christopher Michael Schwob, Timothy Francis McGlennon, Thomas Patrick Dice, Michael John Schramm, Daniel James Brummer, and Gregory James Neeser.
Will the candidates for the degrees of Master of Theological Studies, Master of Arts, and Master of Divinity please rise? Father Hilary, I present the candidates for the degrees of Master of Theological Studies, Master of Arts, and Master of Divinity, which have been approved by the faculty of the university.
By virtue of the authority committed to me, I confer upon you the degrees of Master of Theological Studies, Master of Arts, and Master of Divinity, which have been approved by the faculty of the university and for which you have been recommended. The Dean of the School of Theology will please have the candidates come forward.
The degree of Master of Theological Studies is conferred upon George Tate Anderberg. Vivian Peterson of the Order of St. Benedict. Jermaine Ray Smith. Patricia Takis of the Sisters of Charity of Leavenworth. The degree of Master of Arts in Theology is conferred upon Jeanette Blonigan Clancy. Christine Kurtzinger. Anthony F. Haas. Alfred Joseph Hopwood. Elias Richard Lorenzo of the Order of St. Benedict. Anne Catherine Mellett. Randy James Nelson, upon whom is also conferred the degree Master of Divinity. Judith A. Oland of the Order of St. Benedict. Andre Prezot. Randy Lewis Schoen, upon whom is also conferred the degree Master of Divinity. Francisco Raymond Schulte of the Order of St. Benedict. Joseph Robert Young. The degree of Master of Divinity is conferred upon Richard A. Adam. Jeffrey Ronald Fecht of the Order of St. Benedict. Annette Dorothy Fleischman. Andrew J. Kemmerling of the Order of St. Benedict. Vincent David McGuire of the Order of St. Benedict. Chris Gerard Ostmeyer of the Society of the Precious Blood. John M. Shedda. And Richard Roman Walls.
have an announcement about the reception. Due to the rain, which seems to be on and off, the reception, which was scheduled to be outside on the lawn, has been moved. We invite our graduates, along with family and friends, to gather in the Werner Palestra, where refreshments will be served. Let us pray. Almighty God, we thank you for the gift of knowledge and love which you have made to dwell with us today. We thank you for these graduates, their parents, relatives, and friends. Favor them always with your love and wisdom as they seek your presence and will, you who live forever and ever. Amen.